I can check eventually in LinkedIn until we are waiting, so I know that we are live. So let me check.
Now it's live.
Yes, I see myself. Okay, so welcome to the person that are watching us in LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter. We wait just 2 minutes more for these for starting these webinars on the policy framework of energy democracy. So my name is Silvia Caneva. I work for WIP Renewable Energies. WIP is the coordinator of the SocialRES project. As you see here, we have the speaker of today, Jakob Hoffman from Adelphi. Adelphi is, I would say, our policy expert in SocialRES. Today, Jakob, he will provide us with an overview of the policy framework of social innovation. So I will spoil a bit. So we are talking about crowdfunding, energy community, energy cooperative, aggregation, prosumers. As I said, I will wait 1 minute more to start really to ask, to give the floor to Jakob. In the meantime, I welcome the participant that I see already connected in Zoom. The participant in Zoom, they will have the possibility to interact with Jakob after his presentation. Anyhow, if you are watching, let's say, the webinars in YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, you can write your comment, your question in the comments, and then we have our colleague from Icons. They will direct to me in the chat, in the Zoom, in the chat, your questions. So please don't be worried. Let's say that if you are in YouTube, LinkedIn, and Twitter, because you can still interact with us. So I'll just wait 1 minute more, also because we have also Andreas that from Adelphi that he will also provide some words during the presentation of today. Okay, it's 1 o'clock. We can start. So welcome, as I said, to this webinar. It's the number 3 organizing the SocialRES project. SocialRES is a project co-financed by the European Commission. The aim of SocialRES is to investigate several social innovation, such as crowdfunding, cooperative, and aggregation, in order to provide the citizens with tools to have an active participation in the energy transition. Today with us, we have, as you said, already connected 2 speakers from Adelphi. Adelphi is the policy expert of SocialRES. I will, first of all, give a short introduction of Andreas and Jakob, and then I will give the floor to them for their presentation. So I start with Andreas. Andreas, thanks for the connection. So Andreas is a project manager at Adelphi, working on the topics of energy policy, energy management. He's managing project on behalf of Federal Ministry, the European Commission. The focus of his work is the evaluation of policy measures and the development of new strategies for energy efficiencies, the analysis of policy financial aspect of new heating supply technologies, as well as research on social science aspect of energy transition. Jakob is an analyst for the energy team of Adelphi. His main research area is energy policy in the European Union, with a particular focus on the social aspect of the energy transition. This includes topics as energy efficiency, energy poverty, citizen participation in renewable energy system. So I'm really very happy now to give the floor to Andreas and Jakob. So I will now switch off my camera, and then I come back to you later once you have the final slide of your presentation. Thanks again for your participation today. The floor is yours.
All right, thank you. I'll just share the screen and then Andreas will kick us off.
Yes, we can see the presentation.
All right.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Silvia, and hello everyone. Thanks for joining our lunch event, which is part of the EU Green Week. And we are glad to be here. We are glad that you are joining us and have a brief deep dive in social innovations in our project. I will have a quick start with introducing the project and the organization we work for, Adelphi. So about the SocialRES project, it's a Horizon 2020 funded project which is spanning over 3.5 years. And we are just right in the middle of the project, which is, I think, a good moment to look at research which has been done already in the project. Some findings we have already investigated over the course of the last 1.5 to 2 years, and also to look forward what's to be expected and what's upcoming from the project and the project partners. Generally speaking, the SocialRES project is aiming to identify new business models and services which we put under the umbrella term social innovations, which involves cooperatives, crowdfunders, and aggregators, which operate in the renewable energy sector. So we want to look at social innovations which increase the participation of citizens, and not only in terms of having a say on the energy transition, but also in terms of direct financial involvement in the energy transition and getting direct benefits from the energy transition and the renewable energy projects which are involved. For our aim, we have brought a consortium researching on this subject. So in total, we have 13 partners in 9 countries. And what I think is a big bonus or plus of this project, we have also 7 case study providers, which are representing the business models which we are looking at. So we have a very practical side involved in this project, and this is helping us to look at specific cases, to look at what's happening on the ground, and not only having a theoretical perspective on the subject, but also having a very practical insight on what's happening with the social innovations across the European Union. Our role, Adelphi's role in the project, is working very much on the policy side, on the policy recommendations. So since we are an organization which is working close to political stakeholders, we are having a look at the European political framework and at the policies related to the subject of social innovations in the renewable energy field. Let's have a quick look at the consortium. So as I said, we are spanning across the European Union, which is, I think, very interesting because we can see that social innovations have very different implementation level across EU member states. We have some EU member states which are very much advanced already in implementing social innovations. But we also have member states where social innovations like the cooperatives are facing quite severe obstacles to enter the market, that there are many market barriers which prevent new organizations, new business models to be implemented. So I think that this comparative analysis across several EU member states is very enriching, is very beneficial to get a good overall picture on what can be done to increase the market penetration of these business models and to help foster these social innovations. About Adelphi, the organization we work at, Adelphi has an interdisciplinary team of more than 200 experts, and we are very much specialized on the field of energy policy and climate policy. We are working on international projects. 2/3 of our projects are EU-wide projects, and we are carrying out consulting projects as well as research projects. As I said, we are a specialized organization. We work usually for public authorities, so for the German federal ministries, but also for the European Commission. And we focus very much on the climate aspect and the related energy transition aspects when it comes to energy efficiency, energy management, renewable energies. That's usually the main subjects we are working on. And now I'm happy to hand over to my colleague Jakob, which will give some insights on our work in this project and insights on the preliminary findings we have carried out in our latest policy paper, which has been already published online. But I think Jakob will say a little bit about that. Thank you, and enjoy the presentation.
All right, thank you very much, Andreas. Also, thank you to everyone who tuned in today. Thank you also to Silvia and Alicia for organizing this event. So as a brief overview of what I'm going to be talking about today, I'm just beginning with a very brief overview of energy democracy, then looking at the models that exist that promote energy democracy. So they've been mentioned 2 times now. And we're going to look a little bit more in depth at them. Then we're going to move on to the legislation around energy democracy. This will focus a bit on the EU, looking at the clean energy package and the more recent EU crowdfunding regulation as it applies to one of the models we're looking at. And then lastly, we're going to look at some barriers and enablers from some of the research we've done, the case studies from within the project we've spoken to, and we're going to look a bit at exactly how some policy frameworks that exist in some EU member states already are enabling or are still acting as barriers towards the wider uptake of these social innovations. So to start, the rise of energy democracy. Excuse me. So energy democracy is still a relatively recent concept, and its rise in the political sphere is even more recent, let's say. Before, obviously, energy justice, environmental justice, terms like these have been around for longer, and even the practices that kind of constitute the idea of energy democracy have been around for a bit longer. So thinking especially about energy cooperatives, they've been around for a while, however, the concept hasn't been defined as such. And there's a couple of factors that have led energy democracy to become more mainstream, let's say, in the last year. So the first thing is, what is energy democracy? And of course, it's in the name democracy. In any true democratic system, the people are represented and they have a voice and a role in the decision making concerning the issues that affect their lives. And in energy democracy, this is the same. It's about participation and new governance models in the energy market that give a voice to the people. And the first thing we have is decarbonization and energy transformation. And this is kind of describes the ultimate goal of energy democracy, to have this carbon neutral energy grid, to move away from fossil fuels, and also assuring that supply is affordable and reliable and also accessible to everyone. And decentralization and citizen inclusion in the energy sector, this is kind of the pathway and the tools, let's say, that energy democracy has at its disposal. And looking at it in the democratic sense, the decentralization, it spreads the decision-making power out across more actors, and the citizen inclusion gives these new actors, who in this case are the citizens, a newfound power. And politically, why it's increased in salience is, well, one, the technological change. It's simply the new energy sources, renewables and other new technologies for generation, but even for storage, for example, they just provide more opportunities for decentralization and participation than a fossil fuel-based energy grid. So obviously you have significantly lower entry costs, And it's down to an individual level that anyone with enough space and enough capital can become an energy producer or a prosumer, and be involved actively in the market. And at the political level, the energy transition is the biggest project that we are all currently engaged in. And of course, it affects everyone's life. And whether the effects are felt directly or whether it's just a change in what the source of your electricity is, and maybe you don't feel it directly, within the energy transition debate, the just transition is a big objective of the EU. And this idea of making sure that no one is left behind, objectives like these, they really fit into the framework of the energy transition. You can see that energy democracy and this idea of leaving no one behind and including everyone, they kind of go hand in hand. So of course, this also led to its kind of rise in importance in the political sphere. And also, the last thing about the just transition, it's very focused on areas that might be more hard hit by the energy transition. And these models, which we will speak about in a second, they offer opportunities for job creation, for strengthening local economies, all while bringing forward the decarbonization of the energy grid. So they're seen as kind of attractive tools politically. And lastly, why it's desirable? Well, yeah, it's a good question, because obviously a field as technical as the energy sector, people may ask the question why the average citizen should have a say and why decisions should not be left to engineers and other experts. Fundamentally, of course, citizens should have a voice in the aspects that affect their life. And we saw this in the local resistances to wind parks and solar parks in various EU countries and even across the world. The opposition to things that arguably are beneficial to them. This top-down approach sometimes meets resistance, so it's good to have more inclusion. And also, yeah, simply including more citizens just improves the governance and improves the decision-making, and planners, project developers may become aware of local contexts and local nuances that they wouldn't know about if there was no citizen involvement. So looking briefly at the models that can promote energy democracy, and these are the ones we have mentioned now a couple of times: energy communities, renewable energy communities, energy aggregators, and renewable energy crowdfunding platforms. Of course, prosumership and collective self-consumption also play an important role in the decentralization of the energy grid and in energy democracy, but we'll focus on these three models now because they also are the core of the SocialRES project. So renewable energy communities, they're the most well-established model of the ones we will speak about today. They're based off the energy cooperative model, and it's also kind of the model that most closely captures this true idea of energy democracy that we've talked about. That's due to their governance structure. So it's based off the cooperative structure, as I said. So normally, usually every member has one vote, regardless of the equity stake that they have in the project. And in any case, no one is allowed to have a voting majority in these. So it kind of guarantees this equal representation that we're used to in a democracy. And beyond this, again, their goal should be to serve the local community and to bring economic and social benefits to a wider scope, to the general community, rather than just to the shareholders or the members who are involved. So this is the oldest model, and as you can see also some numbers on the screen, it's also more widespread. There's around 3,400 in Europe. Energy aggregators it's a newer model, and it relies on the flexible consumption and flexible generation of electricity. I won't go too much into the detail. However, looking at what makes it democratic, why it fits into this energy democracy framework, is because you can aggregate the loads of many individual households or building level consumers. They can sell the flexibility of generation or consumption into the wholesale market. And this opportunity to enter the wholesale market is something that previously was impossible for an individual consumer. And so it just opens up the market. And this is often, referred to as democratizing the market. However, here they're democratizing the market because there's newfound access, which previously didn't exist. However, we still need to be careful, because democratization is not only about making the market more accessible, but it's also about making the market more approachable. So with energy aggregators, this might be in the longer term, because they can offer, once optimized and once some more technological shifts happen, a very easy road to participation in the energy market. Lastly, just also to mention here, there is no set governance structure as there is in energy communities. So energy aggregators can still operate as a traditional firm, but of course, it still allows the average consumers to get involved in some way. And the last one we look at as part of this project are crowdfunding platforms for renewable energy. Also crowdfunding, a well-established model. It's been around for a long time. Of course, now being applied more frequently in the renewable energy sector. It's similar to aggregators and renewable energy communities, in the sense that it opens up a market which was previously inaccessible to consumers, and it also opens up the market more than, say, anyone could have installed a PV installation on their roof. However, this includes more people, as you don't need to have the space, or you don't need to bear the full cost of a renewable energy installation. And it allows also capital to flow into different projects and project developers to reach a broader audience. So looking at some of the more recent legislation around energy democracy, the most important thing we have to look at first is the clean energy package. Here, specifically at renewable energy communities, they're defined in the Renewable Energy Directive. And I've just put the definition up here. It mentions the things that I mentioned before, voluntary participation. It's controlled by shareholders in the proximity of the project. And the shareholders need to be natural persons, SMEs, or local authorities. So can't be any actor whose primary economic activity is energy generation. And the last point, which I also mentioned briefly, that the main goal is not financial profits, but rather a wider array of benefits. And we're gonna just look very briefly at some of the potential impacts. So looking at and what this is trying to achieve. Looking at the consumer side, joining a renewable energy community, it should be easy. It shouldn't be seen as a risky move. And this is something that the EU and this directive put a lot of importance on. Consumers are guaranteed to maintain, obviously, all their rights as energy consumers in the EU. They have access to clear information so that they can make good decisions. This covers price, fixed cost, tariff price. They maintain the right of withdrawal from any contract. So this is just to lower some of the barriers to entry for the average consumer and to see this as a more attractive option when compared to maybe some traditional energy suppliers. And looking at the rights to and obligations of renewable energy communities, the most important aspect is giving them a definition. And so once this definition is transposed into international laws, it means that they have a much more solid legal standing, and they can also appeal to the courts if they feel that their rights as renewable energy communities have been violated. They also get the legal guarantee. They have the right to sell the energy they produce. The assurances like these that they have to, the suppliers and distributors have to enter into contracts with them, reduces the risks of founding an energy community. They're also allowed to have electricity power purchase agreements. So this provides them with another tool that they can better that they can use to gain a more long-term financial planning, long-term financial security. So providing them with some tools and making sure that they're allowed to use these tools to build up sustainable business models. It also lays out, the directive also lays out a very clear enabling framework and what should be included in it. And this, again, just aims at giving them a stronger standing, with one of the main points being that member states must identify and remove any regulatory barriers, be they regulatory or administrative barriers. And of course, this will vary in between countries. And so this is also, there won't be a one size fits all across the EU. Each member state will transpose this in a different way, taking into account the national context. And exactly, so the objective is also to level the playing field and basically to remove the dependence of renewable energy communities on financial support programs, because they have relied very heavily on these in the past, government support programs, and also just to present renewable energy communities as a viable option for all consumers and not just enthusiasts, as we have seen, as currently a lot of the members of renewable energy communities are still, it's niche and they're enthusiasts in the renewable energy spheres, let's say. Looking at the energy aggregators, so even here, an explicit objective of the electricity market regulation is to facilitate aggregation of distributed demand and supply. Again, here, just the definition. So it's just about combining multiple loads that you can then sell or buy. And Article 13 in the directive, is the Internal Electricity Market Directive, states that consumers don't need the consent of their electricity supplier to sign a separate contract with an independent aggregator. And so this makes it a lot easier for aggregators to approach consumers. Consumers don't fear any type of repercussions for joining an aggregator. And so this law basically protects consumers from being discriminated against by the supplier. And here again, the goal is to reduce the administrative and financial and technical barriers so that consumers that have flexible energy production or consumption can easily join an aggregator and be compensated for doing so. And so obviously the easier it is to join an aggregator, the more people will do it, the stronger the value proposition of an aggregator will be. So here again, as far as the aggregators are concerned, the member states will choose their own implementation model and also approach the governance for aggregators, or independent aggregators in this case. So here again, it's likely that they'll be structured as normal traditional firms with traditional business models. However, like I mentioned before, it allows consumers to have some sort of involvement in the energy market. And the next, the last point is about the crowdfunding platforms. So late last year, the EU crowdfunding regulation was passed, and this aimed to really standardize a highly fragmented sector. So while this obviously applies to every sort of crowdfunding activity for whatever project or product that might be, in our case, it's relevant for renewable energy crowdfunded projects. And here again, as mentioned, it's a traditional model, so matching the business funding interest of investors and project owners through a platform. And so what changes in this regulation? It affects all the relevant actors, so the operators of the platforms, the developers, the retail investors. And the first thing that it really does is it sets a threshold. So the regulation only applies to crowdfunding projects with a consideration of 5 million euros or less. This is important. During some of the rounds of negotiation, the threshold was still set at 1 million. They increased it for the final version. And this is good because, of course, it means that bigger projects can also benefit from crowdfunding activities. So if you think about a wind park or a wind farm, they have a lot higher need for capital, so they can also benefit from this in part. Scale, of course, also the larger the project means you may be able to have better returns for investors. So this was well received. And something else that changed, which was the case in some countries, crowdfunding service providers no longer need authorization as a credit institution or a banking license. This, of course, makes it a lot easier for crowdfunding platforms to compete with traditional lenders, as they don't have the same requirement that they used to. And so they can compete better with traditional financiers of projects. They also no longer need to provide an investor with a prospectus. There's a new instrument that's been introduced called the Key Investment Information Sheet. This reduces the costs of a crowdfunding campaign, as the detail of a prospectus required a lot of time and money to produce properly. So this is will be a more streamlined process that they can make use of. It also really standardized the setup and approval processes. So in Article 12, it really outlines in great details the time frames in which projects can be approved, and it makes the whole process a lot more transparent and, of course, streamlined across the EU, as it's a regulation, so it applies to everyone equally. And another thing it changes is that it allows crowdfunding service providers to operate in any EU country without having a physical presence there. So this had also been an obstacle for crowdfunding platforms and service providers who wanted to expand their activities. So now they can offer a more diverse portfolio, and it opens up also the market to a lot more potential investors. Looking at the investor side, it really, there's a lot of weight given to protecting the investor, of course. They need to provide safeguards, they need to insure the projects and keep cash reserves in order to minimize the potential losses of investors if projects don't work out. This, of course, is also good for investors because it makes them feel safer and invites more people to take part in such a thing. Mentioning again the key investment information sheet, that'll be a powerful tool. It needs to be, as stated in the regulation, fair, clear, and not misleading. So it'll give an overview of the cost, financial and credit risks, the fees associated, the selection criteria of the project, and other risks associated with crowdfunding services. And lastly, also investors will have to pass a knowledge test, which will have to be offered by the crowdfunding platform, just to make sure that the investors know they have a baseline understanding of what they're getting into. This obviously increases the cost a bit for crowdfunding platforms, but it will reassure investors. And yeah, so in broadly, what this could change is it really could unleash a wave of capital from retail investors, perhaps similar to what we've seen through the recent rise in brokerage apps. And where really citizens, because all of a sudden it was so easy, they were much more motivated to more proactively invest their money into things that they believe in. And in particular, it now allows cross-border capital flows. It gives projects in smaller or lower income countries access to new streams of finance, new financiers in the form of these crowdfunding platforms. And yeah, if the growth trends of ESG investing continue across the EU, this could really be something to compete with that, and really could take some of the interest and have investors that invest directly into renewable energy projects. So if it's presented simply, there's a possibility we'll see some similarities with the retail investment wave through the brokerage apps. Now, looking at some of the barriers to energy democracy, or more specifically at the barriers to these social innovations we've just discussed, or these business models we've just discussed, in light of the member states needing to level the playing field or provide an enabling framework, depending on what the model is, the most important step is identifying and removing the barriers that still may exist. So whatever's slowing down the uptake of these new models. And throughout our research, with talks with experts and with practitioners, so people involved in any of these models, we've found a couple of recurring themes across the EU member states. We looked mainly at the ones which are part of our project, so the 7 countries that are part of the project. But to start off, administrative barriers were often cited. They face a lot of difficulty, particularly renewable energy communities, because of their scale. They have to operate as non-profits, or, as I mentioned, minimal profit, and they simply don't have the resources to address some administrative and bureaucratic challenges. For example, drawing up contracts and making contractual agreement for the members, and contractual agreements with partners, other actors in the electricity market. That it takes a lot of time and effort that they don't have. In other cases, there's simply an outdated legal framework that isn't ready to receive new actors like this. We have an example. We found an example in Romania, where the law governing cooperatives was written basically with agricultural cooperatives in mind. So adding a new member to a cooperative was a huge bureaucratic effort. And this framework simply isn't ready to receive a mass consumer cooperative like a renewable energy or community, or a large renewable energy community would be. The competitive framework, again, competing in a market that historically hosted only large firms and that were very centralized, it makes a big difference. And they often face difficulties in the competition. So again, the rules here apply equally to everyone in the electricity market. So if you need to navigate the rules and you're a cooperative or a community with a couple of hundred members, as compared to a company with hundreds of thousands of members and hundreds or thousands of people in staff, you quickly find yourself at a disadvantage when it comes to competing for projects or for customers. And speaking of competing for projects, the huge issue we found was competing for tenders. Large companies, they can hedge their bets, they apply to multiple tenders. Each tender, of course, costs a lot of money, a lot of effort to submit. And this was another huge disadvantage for energy communities that we spoke to, who have difficulty competing and can't apply to as many tenders as, let's say, a bigger company. And again, this focus on market liberalization, we heard a number of complaints, this removal of feed-in tariffs and towards a more free market approach. It forces these business models to be profitable, where, you know, in spirit, a lot of the focus was never on the profitability, but more on this intention of creating some social and environmental value, while of course they should still be financially sustainable. And the last point in competition also sort of falls under administration is some of the public procurement regulation that a lot of actors faced. The public procurement regulation in many cases means that municipalities they award contracts on a cost basis, and they have no way of accounting for, you know, the added benefit of having a socially inclusive model win a project tender. And technological and digital infrastructure, it's less directly affected by policies, but of course, smart meters and home batteries, electric vehicles, PV, household PV, they're all going to strongly affect the rate at which these business models are adopted and implemented. So it's important to observe in each member state how these technologies are supported through various policies. And then the last barrier we came across was simply the lack of awareness. So here the public is not aware of the options. It's a very niche field, and this switch from energy being this passive thing that we're so used to, where you turn on the light and you never think about it, you can move into a place and you might never change your energy contract and never think about it, to this more active, to take a more active role in it, is a switch that will take some time, and you need to push people towards it, and of course also just the hesitancy of putting money into models that are seen as maybe more risky, that if you don't fully understand them, you're feel more secure keeping the money in the bank or something. Lastly, to wrap up, it's not all bad. There's not only barriers. We also looked at some enablers of energy democracy over business models. The first large enabler that a lot of people we spoke to used was partnering up with the municipality, with the local government, can really help overcome a number of the previously mentioned barriers. It gives a degree of legitimacy to the project, to the business model, that they might previously not have had. The municipality can, in a sense, market the business, or at least definitely it will increase the reach that the project may have had. And they can also act as mediators and really open the door for cooperation with more actors of the local stakeholders. And of course, also for municipalities, they've welcomed this because they are also happy to have a stronger role in the governance of the projects in their backyard, basically. In terms of decentralization and prosumership, prosumption, I haven't spoken about it a lot, but of course there's a lot of policies in a lot of member states that support household renewable energy production, and this is an important first step. It gives people a personal stake in the renewable energy system and thus also the energy transition. And while household renewable energy systems aren't accessible to everyone because of the price barrier, because you also need the right space for it, they can still raise awareness in a community and have these spillover effects. And you might the neighbor who might not be able to afford or doesn't have the space for their own PV plant, they might look into other ways of getting involved. And then they might stumble across an energy community where you can enter through buying shares, or an aggregator, or a crowdfunding platform if you want to invest in renewable energy. So that definitely acts as an opportunity. And of course, importantly, decentralization, prosumership also can play a big role in countries where access is still an issue, especially in more rural areas. There's some big opportunities for it there. Again, the next enabler, financial incentives, while of course the move is towards a more a free market approach, the financial incentives, of course, are the largest driving factor. If the activities are more profitable, more people will join, and that's the way it is. There are many different approaches to this that different countries have tried. Tax rebates and feed-in tariffs and bonuses. So whether this is for a project or a household generation, there's a lot of different approaches. And the last one, which is more forward looking, is having citizen ownership targets. Here you can look to the Netherlands, who in their NECP of, I think, a year or two ago, implemented a target for 50% citizen ownership of renewable energy generation locally, so local ownership of 50%, with that target being set for 2030. This same thing also included mandatory stakeholder discussions before any project was started. While this might prolong the process in terms of getting a product off the ground, they figured that actually in the long run it saves time and money, because you won't have as much opposition, and you won't have any legal, you won't have any, you avoid the courts, you won't have any legal disputes. And again, this obviously without any direct financial aid, this would immediately make the business models that we have discussed today a lot more attractive, because they can obviously play a big role in meeting such a target if it were to be set. That's it for enablers. And just to have you also think a bit, we'll have a couple of questions to the audience, or also things that we'll be looking at in terms of future research. First is just looking at the heterogeneity of the EU and looking at front runners and laggards in terms of renewable energy production, particularly in the decentralized citizen inclusion sense. Will the participation be equal across the EU? And then asking really if this is what the average consumer wants, speaking about how energy is a passive thing, or we've known it to be a passive thing, and now turning it into something that they have to be active. What are the information costs of having to navigate what renewable energy community should I join? What crowdfunding project do I invest in? And which way do I vote at assemblies? Will they take the time to vote? And lastly, looking at the redistributive effects, they're obviously spoken about a lot, but there's still questions about what are the barriers to entry in terms of energy communities. Are they too high for low-income families and vulnerable people? Will only high-income earners have the disposable income to freely invest in crowdfunding projects? And will middle or high-income families have electric cars and be able to participate in energy aggregators and have PV plants on the roof? So these are all questions that we will see, and they will need to be researched further. And lastly, also looking beyond the electricity market, because we've spoken exclusively about the electricity market now, what are the possibilities of energy democracy in terms of the heating sector? That's all for me. thank you very much. I'll put the questions back in a second. Just thank you all for your attention. There's the emails of Andreas and I if you want to contact us for anything. And also the full paper on where the enablers and barriers are more explained in more detail. It's on the SocialRES website, socialres.eu. And there is also a paper on the business model, where each business model I've very briefly talked about today is explained in a lot more detail, which is written by also our partners in the project. So thank you very much. And yeah, I'm looking forward to any questions.
Thanks a lot, Jakob. I see one participant, Chris, has already answered one of your questions related to energy democracy in the heating sector. Is in the chat. He has provided a link. I have some questions for you, but since we still have 10 minutes, I would like first to leave the floor to the participant that we have in Zoom. So please, to the participant in Zoom, if you want to directly ask your question to Jakob, Andreas, this is the moment. So let's see if any of you, so don't be, you can switch on the camera, also the microphone, if you should have any question, or if you should have the answer, let's say, to the question provided by Jakob. I don't see anyone that wants to answer. Okay, so at least you have the first answer, Jakob, in the chat, and then yes, yes, Chris, please, Chris, if you want to have the floor, you are more than welcome to provide more details. Please, Chris, the floor is yours, and you can switch on if you are there.
Yeah.
Hello, Chris.
Okay. Hi, Silvia. Hi, Jakob and Andreas. Thank you very much for your explanations. And yes, while you were talking, I was writing down some questions, and some of the questions you're actually posing here to us at the final slide. I don't have the answers to all of them. I don't think anyone has. So yes, one of the issues is we talk about energy democracy. I should say I represent Goyaner, a RESCOP in Spain, in the Basque Country, and of course people will say, well, you're a bunch of middle class, people who've got some excess money, and you now want to be do-gooders, right? That's the sort of traditional criticism we get. So therefore, we try and create mechanisms so that people who cannot afford to enter into prosumership, who cannot who are not homeowners themselves, because before you can invest into photovoltaics, for example, you need to be a homeowner usually. So we try and provide certain mechanisms, and energy communities would be one of them. The other one would be to allow also people who cannot afford to enter in an energy community to pay upfront or to invest, to participate in a different way. So these are the mechanisms that we're definitely trying to work on. We don't have a definitive answer yet, but it would definitely mean that there would be no upfront investment, and that they would have access to energy, to cheaper energy, let's say in a privileged way. But then the issue is, who will you let in under these privileged conditions, and who not? And one other thing that I would like to raise is the aspect of having to compete with larger actors. The other day I was in a meeting with RESCOP EU, the advocacy group, and there they were analyzing the draft of the state aid guidelines that are now under consultation. There is absolutely no mention of renewable energy cooperatives in that guideline. It is very much, let's say, free market, a liberal free market vision that is exposed there, and there is hardly any consideration for the imbalance in information and knowledge, and as you also said, in objectives, so that the other market actors are purely profit driven, whereas renewable energy cooperatives by design and by law cannot be financial profit driven. They are based on socio-economic and environmental values. So again, I'm not sure whether this is a question, is just something we're sort of stuck with. We don't know exactly how to reply to that. And then the final thing is, yeah, so heating sector is also something we're working on, and the BCOOP project is also trying to respond through BE as the bioenergy. So how can energy communities participate through enabling bioenergy to provide heating to residential consumers? Okay, that was a long intervention.
Yes.
I can't even say that it's a question. So
yes, it's food for thought, I would say, but I leave the floor either to Jacob or Andreas if you wanted to get back to Chris. Thanks a lot to Chris.
Yeah, I think there's not much to say. First of all, thank you very much for the intervention, and also thank you for this for the BCOOP link. We'll look into that. Yeah, exactly. I mean, these questions are here just kind of to challenge a bit, to make people think a bit. I know that there's a lot of there's a lot of energy communities that have programs in place that they redistribute profits to vulnerable people fighting energy poverty, things like this. So yeah, we will have to see as it becomes more mainstream, if it becomes more mainstream. And yeah, thank you.
Yes. Okay. Do you want to add anything else, Jacob?
Oh, no.
Okay. Andreas, do you have anything to add? Otherwise, I have other question for Jacob.
Nothing specifically, but of course, I think this is a big topic. The participation of low-income households in social innovations, in energy democracy, is, I think, a very important condition also for the success of the energy transition, because we need a broad acceptance and a broad participation from households across different income levels. Otherwise, we will not get the political support we need for the next steps. So I think it's important when we look at how social innovations and how these participation models are set up, that they are inclusive also for low-income households, because to be honest, research has already shown that to date, quite many of these social innovations and participatory models are not including low-income households to a high extent. Low-income households are often not in the situation that they can participate financially on these business models, on these financing schemes. So I think this is an very important subject, and other projects I know of Horizon also are dealing with that. Yeah, it's something we should always keep in mind.
Yes, indeed. Thanks a lot, Andreas. Please, Chris, let us know if you want to add anything else to this feedback from Jacob and Andreas. Let's see if I see other question from the participant. No. So just to close the webinar of today, Jacob, I have seen in your white paper on best practice of social innovation, that is, by the way, available in the SocialRES website, that you have really compared, let's say, the energy collective action, so that we have seen today, crowdfunding, energy community aggregation, with the concept of prosumation. Do you want, Jacob, just to highlight the benefit of collective action that you have seen, that you have analyzed in your white paper against prosumation, to define the reason why you have done this comparison?
Yeah, I think I mentioned it very briefly during the presentation now, but it's just the idea that to be a prosumer, you need to own enough space to put a PV installation. You need to have the money to buy the PV installation. In a lot of places, even though there are government support schemes for doing something like this, it's a big bureaucratic effort. You need to pay for the people who come install it. So it's just it takes a lot of time and a lot of money, and opening the market through being able to buy shares or being able to invest even a little bit amount of money into a crowdfunding project. It just opens the market and the possibilities for participation in a much wider way to a much wider audience. So that's the main thing. But I also, as I mentioned, having prosumers in the neighborhood, let's say, and seeing PV plants, PV installations around. I mean, this does affect people in a way, and it makes them, kind of start to think about the issues. So it's definitely a part of it as well. Yes,
prosumer are a good advertiser, I want to say, about renewable energy. So they are, of course, also relevant. And then anyhow, they can be aggregated through aggregators, and so also being part of energy collective action. So this was my question. So I think we can really close the webinars of today. We will have other 9 webinars in SocialRES. SocialRES will end in summer 2022, so next year. So please keep following us on the social media, so in the SocialRES channels, because we are going to talk about energy behavior of citizens, crowdfunding, cooperative aggregation at the next webinars. It was about the ESIP, the European Energy Social Innovation Platform. So please keep following us. So now really we have still a few seconds. I would like to thank, of course, the colleague from Adelphi, Andreas Jacob, for the great valuable presentation. The colleague of WIP, Magdalena Kovarova, that is connected also today in the background, icons that are providing Alice, Deborah, all the technical support that you don't see it, but it is behind having these Zoom webinars also in Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. So thanks a lot. So if there are no further questions, I will like to wish you a nice afternoon. And then we keep you informed about the next webinars. And thanks again. And so we can close the webinars at this point. Thanks a lot. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.